Samarkand and Bukhara for 500 years led the world in mathematics, sciences, medicine, philosophy, hadith, fiqh, and tasawwuf, Sufism. You see here the Mir Arab Madrasa and, and beauty and knowledge combined. That was the heritage of Central Asia. These Sufi saints spread inclusive Islam in the subcontinent, promoting love and mercy, ethics, adab, and beauty. Husn-e akhlaq were central. And this was the mental framework of Mughal society. And secondly, the nomadic Turkic roots of the Mughals was crucial. Turkic women were independent, rode horses, hunted, and even ruled. With Islam coming, these rights were fortified. They got inheritance, right to inheritance, education, property, employment, divorce, and spiritual equality. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, admired intelligent, independent women, a model the Mughals inherited. Babur advised Humayun in his letter to Humayun, conquer hearts. I repeat, conquer hearts. The progress of Islam is better by the sword of kindness. Bring together people of different religions. And I might note that the polar opposite of this was colonialism. The Mughals created a cosmopolitan empire, celebrating diversity, funding temples, churches, gurdwaras, and fostering an exquisite synthesis in every art. Hindustan under the Mughals became a superpower, built on good governance, meritocracy, and innovation, accounting for 27% of world GDP, even in the middle of the 18th century. And needless to say, after 100 years of colonial looting, 27% of world GDP became 2% in 1900. Anyway, that's an aside. So that's the background of these ladies. These women, the Mughal women, were partners in power. Mughal men valued and honored educated, cultured, competent women. Those were the days. The women wielded their education, their wealth and opportunity to influence politics, culture, and the environment and the economy. Now, education. Oh, why am I going back? Sorry. This was at 4 years old. They were sent to the Sufis for their ethical education. So, the Mughal boys and girls had an identical education. They studied Islam, philosophy, mathematics, logic, poetry, history, sciences, aesthetics, calligraphy, music, art, martial skills, and writing. And they internalized the ethical message that for a Muslim ruler, the prime duty was justice and public welfare. There was no need for a nab, okay? Women were the wealth. Women were financially independent. They had jagir, salaries, tax collection rights, operated international trade, caravanserais, ships, and sometimes armies. Politically, these women were active in dynastic politics, who was going to succeed the emperors, appointments, alliances, and diplomacy. They issued farmans, received petitions, traveled widely for diplomacy, for war, for hunting, and pilgrimage. sorry, there should be two here. Oh. Polo and tent pegging were a favorite sport. The most honored were the grandmothers, and this is, we've been told that these women were just lounging around, wasting their time. The most honored were the grandmothers, mothers, aunts, and foster mothers. The most important lady of the time had the official title of Padshah Begum, Lady Emperor, the de facto chief advisor to each emperor. Now, I just give you a taste. There's so much detail, but I've just picked a few ladies to give you an idea and just thumbnail sketches. Khanzada Begum. Khanzada Begum was Babar's sister. She was a master of diplomacy and political strategy. She traveled across Sindh, Kabul, and Kandahar in harsh winters, negotiating alliances and calming rebellions, thus securing the empire's unity when, Humayun's brothers were rebelling. At 60, she became Padshah Begum and ensured financial independence for all the leading women of the empire. And now I have to share with you a little tidbit because I find this very intriguing. At one banquet that Khanzada hosted, as described by Gulbadan Begum, there were women who always dressed as men, were martial arts experts, played polo and performed music. And everyone was very cool with this. I mean, this was just considered perfectly okay in the upper reaches of Mughal society. And then, of course, you have the tough cookie, Hamida Bano Begum. This is when she had returned from one of her trips. Sorry, did I miss? No, okay. Now, this is not necessarily, they think it's a likeness of Hamida Bano, but of course, we can't tell. So this is the graceful Hamida Bano, and there should be, sorry, I think I'm missing one, Balid.
No,
there should be.
No, keep going. Hamida Bano ki mohar.
There should be another one of her presiding at the birth of Akbar. Okay, well. So Akbar had so much confidence in his highly competent mother that he gave her charge of the capital Fatehpur Sikri when he went to war. In effect, she was the ruler of the empire. And remember, in Akbar's time, seclusion had already begun because he had, married the Rajput ladies. Again, when Lahore was the imperial capital, right here in this city, he appointed her the governor, managing the empire's administration. And notably, the male officials had no problem working under a woman. She was extremely learned and is famous for her great library. And I don't think there were any posters of her. Okay. She was, really a force to be considered. And then we come to Bakhtun Nisa. I love Bakhtun Nisa. She was Akbar's half-sister. She was appointed governor of Kabul in 1581 when her brother, the previous governor, rebelled. In 3 years, she actually stabilized Afghanistan, simultaneously dealing with all the troublesome Afghan tribes and the Mughal imperial intrigues and politics. Can we even imagine that today, right? The whole milieu was totally different when a lady was in charge of Afghanistan. And then, of course, we come to Empress Noor Jahan. Now, this is how most of people think of her, right? This kind of very fancy lady, all decked in jewels. But this is how she wanted to be seen. Note the dress almost like a man. Look at the way she's standing with her gun. And that was actual Noor Jahan. Exceptionally talented, Noor Jahan co-ruled the empire, exercising the ruler's prerogative. Coins were, now this is so important, these are all symbols of sovereignty, of actual rulership, were coins and farmans. And these were minted in her name. Imperial farmans were issued under her authority. She appeared unveiled in the Jharoka and negotiated directly with European ambassadors. And interestingly, again, please note, she faced no opposition in the prevailing open-minded political culture. She was also the empire's best shot, led military operations, owned ships, traded internationally, and with her refined aesthetics, she became a trendsetter in architecture, gardens, fashion, culture, and so on. And this is, of course, the famous tomb she designed, which became the model for the Taj Mahal. Then we come to the next generation, Jahanara Begum. Again, we can't be 100% sure that this is her, but you know, the artists, because obviously the artists were not allowed access to her. Shah Jahan's truly remarkable daughter became Padshah Begum at, does anybody know what age she became Padshah Begum? Anybody? No, 17. 16 or 17, there's a dispute. I mean, imagine the training that she had received by age 16, that she could become Padshah Begum at 17. That means she was the chief advisor to her father. As the most trusted advisor to Shah Jahan, she held the imperial seal, negotiated with ambassadors and other rulers, and the empire's international trade. Politically active, she promoted Dara Shikoh. She commissioned the main Jame Masjid complex in Agra. This was the official mosque at the official capital. And this is this gorgeous, gorgeous mosque, very unique architecture. And she inscribed her name on the entrance. That was the show of power. And it was, as they say, a public assertion of sovereignty. And again, this was perfectly acceptable. All the males were entering through that door on which her name was inscribed. Then she designed and built the most important, I mean, her talent is mind-blowing. She designed and built the most important buildings of Shah Jahanabad. Unfortunately, it was completely destroyed by the British in 1857. She was a disciple of the Sufi saint Mullah Shah. She guided women. She was a Sufi guide. She guided women spiritually, wrote 2 books on Sufism, while also involved in her own manufacturing factories, a trade. She owned ships, and she managed her vast jagirs. I mean, you know, these women were amazing. So here we have the proof also, which, we hope to bring out this connection, how important the ethical teachings of the Sufis were at that time. We have the proof through Jahanara, and that's solid proof because we have it now in writing. We don't have the proof of the earlier decades. So we have proof of the strong influence of tasawwuf on the Mughal family. Roshanara, Jahanara's sister, who was also Padshah Begum under Aurangzeb, under the sixth emperor, reached great spiritual heights, which is evident in her letters and her discourses with her Sufi master. Oops, this has jumped. Okay, now these are letters to Zebun Nisa, and then this is, well, it's not a very nice portrait, but that was the only thing I could access. So Aurangzeb's favorite daughter, Zebun Nisa, a child prodigy, was famous for her intellectual and spiritual accomplishments. Incredibly courageous, she opposed Aurangzeb's politics, and she was imprisoned for life. Her equally cultured sister, Zinatun Nisa, became Padshah Begum. So, now, the Mughal Zanana, as you can imagine, was a lively, creative blending of multiple religions and cultures where women shaped an exquisite new aesthetic in art, architecture, textiles, music, miniatures, cuisines, gardens, etc., etc. Just little samples of the kind of exquisite work that was being done. And then, this is very nice, these Mughal women's examples saved the suffering European women who used to dress like this. And then they were the dress inspired by Bengal muslin, Kashmiri shawls, and Madras scarves. So the Mughal women's great service to European women. So, these ladies commissioned madrasas, tombs, mosques, homeless shelters, wells, caravanserais. Half of Shah Jahanabad's buildings were built by women. They funded scholars, poets, Sufi institutions, Brahmins, Bhaktis, widows and orphans through grants and charity, creating a vibrant cultural ecosystem. And in the end, I'd just like to leave you with the idea that these ladies were not just behind the throne. They shared the throne of the world's superpower. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. This is going to be a tough act to follow.
Make it fun.
This is the first time. I can't guarantee it's not going to be like this, so keep your expectations low. Acha lag gaya? Acha, excellent. All right, I'm going to start with this. Kabul, 1785. Thus, in written form, it is enshrined that whosoever from all women and men that seek the path of transcendent God can come to her service and take the path from her. What you're looking at are the final lines of a 3-page diploma issued by Khwaja Safiullah of Kabul, the premier scholar and Sufi of Afghanistan, Balochistan, and Sindh, to his #1 student and successor, Bibi Sahiba Kalan. Kalan meaning great, exalted. A diploma that recognized her as the Qayyum, the highest saint of the age. Now, in the course of my research on Sufi networks in the Durrani Empire, in South and Central Asia, I discovered that the 2 largest religious networks in the Afghan Durrani Empire in circa 1800 were both led by women. Bibi Sahiba Kalan of Kabul and Bibi Sayyada of Chamkani, who inherited the largest waqf in what is today Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This happened to be just the tip of an iceberg. Eventually, I was swept into a 15-year odyssey, taking me just in this project to over 50 towns from the Afghanistan-Uzbekistan border to the India-Pakistan border in search of clues. So right now, I'm going to briefly talk about the chief protagonist, try to figure out how to negotiate this, of my upcoming book, The Saint and Scholar, Bibi Sahiba Kalan, who passed away in 1803, the Khalifa Awwal of a Sufi network stretching from Sindh to Western China. Her name appears in the golden chain of Sufi masters from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, onwards, under her given name Ammat al-Masuma and her takhallus Hazrat Jan-e-Jahan, Khazin-e-Ganj Nahani, the custodian of the hidden treasure. So why does Bibi Sahiba matter to us? Because the sources that I've been blessed, that I've been fortunate to locate regarding her and her successors, shed light on a much larger world of hundreds of female Sufi masters in this region, marginalized in the sources. She exemplifies a model of female authority, of female leadership, particularly in what is today Afghanistan and Pakistan and their immediate neighbors. So about 15 years ago, when I was traveling from Kabul to Mazar-e-Sharif, I found a book about 550 pages in length in Persian and Arabic, which to my surprise contained one of the most complete biographical accounts of a woman scholar saint. And this is actually how I met Bibi Sahiba. It was a chance encounter that blew my mind. Then as I traveled, piece by piece, more sources kept pouring in, and I kept following the leads. In Sindh, I finally discovered several years later her daughter's shrine and met her descendants, who graciously shared with me their manuscripts. Afterwards, another chapter opened up. I was able to collect oral histories and written records in about 20 towns as far as Tharparkar and Rajasthan, where her descendants and followers had settled, in the process discovering over a dozen more female Sufi masters connected to Bibi Sahiba's silsila with huge followings. And here I'm not talking about a lady with 5 followers, with no disrespect to that, doing dhikr. We're talking about spiritual political powerhouses with thousands of followers. Now, to set the stage, Bibi Sahiba was born in Peshawar in 1752, at which time the Durrani Empire centered at Kandahar. Then later on, Kabul and Peshawar had reached from India to Iran. Students, artists, and scholars were coming from all across Asia, and these cities started becoming cosmopolitan hubs with thriving Hindu, Sikh, Jewish, Shia, and Sunni communities. Now, under both the Mughals and the Durranis, Sufism was the highest of the Islamic sciences. It sat at the pinnacle of an educational system. It was a rigorous science of inner purification through meditation, through ethical conduct, and social service. So, almost a millennium before that, actually, by about the 10th, 11th century, Sufism was already integrated with Islamic law, theology, philosophy, and other sciences. So obviously by 18th century, whether you were in Kabul or Peshawar, being a religious scholar like Bibi Sahiba meant you had to be a practicing Sufi and vice versa. Now, Bibi Sahiba belonged to the Naqshbandi Mujaddidi Sufi order. I'm going to refer to them as the Mujaddidis, and they were the most expansive Muslim network of the time from Indonesia to Bosnia, grounded in the Sunnah and Orthodox Islamic practice. They tend to produce more female religious leaders than any other network, in fact, that I have seen in the last 500 years. The Mujaddidis, interestingly, have a very sophisticated and scientific set of methods of inner purification. So with specific meditations and breathing practices, you can enliven these metaphysical energy centers mapped onto the physical body, almost like receptors of divine energy, qalb, ruh, nafs, all grounded in Quran and Sunnah. And through these, you can actually journey towards self-realization with over 30 stages. The intent is not Haal or ecstasy or losing yourself in God, but to produce practical, engaged, and enlightened teachers who are steadfast in the Sharia. In fact, even Mughal princesses, including Roshanara, who I write about in my book, studied with Bibi Sahiba's masters, becoming Sufi guides themselves. This was Bibi Sahiba's world. Now, Bibi Sahiba was born in Peshawar 4 years after the Duranis took it, and she spent her early years between Peshawar and Lahore. Her father was a Bokhari Sayyid, originally a family of Uch Sharif, where centuries earlier her great aunt, Bibi Jaivindi or Jandodi, had already been recognized as a saint. Her mother was Sheikh Ahmad Sirhindi's descendant, who's really the progenitor of the Mujaddidi Sufi order. By the time Bibi Sahiba made Kabul her home in the 1760s, she was already a promising young scholar in her teens. She had studied scripture, law, theology, and Greco-Arabic medicine, as well as Persian literature, and by the age of 7, as she recounts in her own words, which is early by all standards, she even begins her training in mystical practices in the Heart Subtle Center. Fortune had favored her. Her teacher was the venerable Khwaja Safiullah, her maternal uncle, and the most notable figure in Kabul's burgeoning scholastic scene. Khwaja Safiullah had set up a college in the city center in this magical neighborhood of musicians and storytellers called Shor Bazar, which drew in students from as far afield as the small port town of Karachi. He won the respect of 2 Afghan kings. In 1793, King Zaman Shah walked on foot from Kabul's royal citadel to the alleyways of Shor Bazar so that Khwaja Safiullah could tie his coronation turban. As an aside, this was about the time when one of Kabul's greatest poets, who wrote a several hundred-page diwan, was Aisha Durrani. Incidentally, her work became the first book ever published in Afghanistan, the lithograph, in the late 19th century. Now, Khwaja Safiullah placed Bibi Sahiba foremost among 30 or so deputies that he appointed to manage his vast sacred scholastic network from Uzbekistan to the Indus. Bibi Sahiba's fellow deputies, there's a whole chapter I have on this, included some of the Western Mughal Empire's leading jurists and theologians. Among this company, she was, quote, the first and the most perfect, entrusted by Safiullah's own hand when she was in her early 30s, with a diploma assigning all of his thousands of disciples to her charge. So accordingly, in Kabul and in Kandahar, this is an image of their broader family's Kandahari Sufi center in the 1840s, she presides over the education of countless scholars and mystics, both men and women, while hosting scholarly emissaries from neighboring lands and administering medical remedies and, this is a huge topic, mental health services. They have a whole system of actually mental health service provision that I would love to talk about. She was already financially independent, having inherited thousands of acres of land around Afghanistan granted to her lineage, a portion which was later converted to a wildlife preserve where hunted animals could take refuge. In 1797, at age 45, Bibi Sahiba joined Khwaja Safiullah and over 300 companions for a historic Hajj voyage, accompanied by her daughter, a young mystic in her own right, and her 2 sons, the elder of whom chronicled the events of the journey. When the teacher unexpectedly passes away in Yemen, the spiritual and financial affairs of the caravan and the debts of her teacher, and I think many of you will understand what that actually means, fall to Bibi Sahiba. On her return journey, her daughter fell ill and died in Matiari. It's an absolutely spectacular medieval pilgrimage town in Sindh. Bibi Sahiba commissioned a monumental domed shrine and mosque to her honor, which remains to this date a sacred site, and up till now, this Hajj, 2 centuries ago, is still remembered by both Muslims and Hindus in Matiari. I was shocked when I discovered this back in 2014. Now, after this tragic and transformative journey in which she actually has visions of the Prophet and Bibi Fatima, Bibi Sahiba continued to manage the sacred scholastic institutions in Kabul and Kandahar, and then, at the personal invitation from the king of Bukhara, now in Uzbekistan, she left for Central Asia. Her two sons came with her and they participated in debates at the Bukharan court. On the way home, on July 1st, 1803, she passed away at Mazar-e-Sharif, just south of today's Afghan-Uzbek border, which is the spiritual epicenter of Central Asia, built around the sprawling shrine attributed to Imam Ali, in addition to Najaf. Probably most of you know that there are two places that he's meant to be buried, in addition to others. What's remarkable is there are no kings who were buried there at the time, and she was actually given a saint's burial under the second dome of Imam Ali's shrine complex. And this is a member of the Ansari family who were actually responsible for her burial. Her two sons then continued the journey home. The younger became a Sufi master in the Kohistan regions north of Kabul and an anti-colonial mobilizer, a mujahid, martyred in the First Anglo-Afghan War. His elder brother became a noteworthy poet and Sufi and the progenitor of one of Kandahar's most important Sufi lineages, and he's the one who writes the story of his mother. But the story that I'm writing continues well after Bibi Sahiba's passing away. In the 1880s, a tragedy struck Afghanistan. British forces invaded again. Bibi Sahiba's grandsons now, this time, all become mujahids and major military mobilizers fighting in battles like Mewand. Eventually they defeat the British, but after retreating, some of you may know the story, the British put in power Amir Abdur Rahman, their puppet ruler, who starts a bloody purge against the traditional Sunnis, the Sufi orders, the Shia, the Ismailis, and the pagans of Kafiristan, with a British imperial stipend. It's a fascinating and very tragic story. So the family migrates to Sindh. First to the shrine of Bibi Sahiba's daughter in Matiari, which is now their kind of spiritual mahvar, and then to other places where they set up madrasas. At this time, a new model of female spiritual authority was emerging in this whole region from Afghanistan to Sindh. The women of Bibi Sahiba's family generations later were all trained scholars and Sufis. Several authored fatwas. A great example is Bibi Sahiba's great-granddaughter Ammaji, no, not the one on the stamp. Ammaji is one who performed not only all-night meditations, but also worked with Bi Amma, the mother of the Ali brothers, who was also part of the Mujaddidi Silsila and looked upon, in fact, she referred to Ammaji as her Pir. They worked together to mobilize the women of Sindh to support the Khilafat movement, and they gave public speeches together. Her son, this is Ammaji's son, was the head of the Khilafat movement in Sindh, having formerly been a mujahid in Afghanistan, and when he was jailed, she famously sent him a letter to the effect that if in any way he capitulated to the British, her milk was no longer halal to him. This is tough love. But beyond that, Bibi Sahiba's grandsons befriended some of the great Sufis in Tharparkar, who they appointed as their khalifas to spread the order into Rajasthan and beyond. Which is where I discovered a whole new chapter, at least a dozen women appointed by her grandsons who headed these sizable orders. And what's incredible, I'll give you a little taste, is they are all strictly orthodox, but half of their disciples were Hindu, most outside the caste system. All of them were also visited and revered by all the leading Orthodox Deobandi jurists and theologians of the region. It's a world that entirely breaks the mold. Take, for example, Dadi Mittha of Umarkot, to whom a chapter of my book is dedicated. Remarkable figure. She lives in a simple mud hut, but is hosted by the great scholars of the region who had come to learn from her. She was famous not only for her spiritual ghalba over the entire desert, but for protecting peasants. There's a famous episode, one among several, in which a greedy landlord about 100 miles away is terrorizing local villagers, so they come visit her. She goes with them, negotiates with the landlord, and when he refuses to relent, she organizes an armed force of her disciples who defeat the guards and actually hang the tax collector upside down, humiliating him to such a degree that he promises not to extort money again. I should also mention another Khalifa of Bibi Sahiba's great-grandson, a man from Umarkot who was a Malang with long red hair, Miujan Muhammad. He was trained by his mother, who was a great Sufi, and then granted his spiritual authority to his daughter, who was well respected by all the Deobandi Maulvis of Umarkot and Thar. And these are her blessed sandals. This sheikh, by Raat, then passed her spiritual mantle to another woman, and I've been very fortunate to have met many elders in the region who personally knew both of these figures. So why were there so many female Sufi leaders in this part of the world? What was their day-to-day role? How was their authority established? These are the sorts of questions that I attempt in my book. So, to reiterate, why does this matter? First, it should go without saying, these stories, whether the political stories or those in the academic and religious domain, tell of an indigenous model of female religious leadership, political leadership that exists within the moral framework of this region. We're too busy looking outside. Second, the built environment, the shrines all around, and hints in the literature point to many other contemporary women in leadership positions. And the narratives of Bibi Sahiba and her successors can actually provide much needed context for those marginalized in our history. The key is that she points to and is an entryway into the existence of a significant world that has been erased. Thank you very much. I tried. Okay, with that, I want to start reflecting a bit, with your permission. There were some common themes across the worlds that we are both exploring and that we both presented. And there is a question that I often ask, and I wanted to ask your view on this. Whether in the scholastic or religious sphere or in the political sphere, these women have access to incredible education, they have access to a whole set of phenomenal scholastic resources.
And opportunities.
And opportunities, right? And networks. So to what degree is this an elite story?
Well, by the way, please feel free to interject with your comments or questions. We're just, keeping it like an open dialogue. Actually, this a part of it interests me a lot because I guess even seeing the dying embers of a society where there was nafasat, where there was enormous respect for women, and opportunities were provided for women. And I was also observing society at different levels. And that was a whole culture of adab. We talk about adab and akhlaq having disappeared from Pakistan today. And I was, fortunate, as I'm sure many in my generation are, to have lived in a Pakistan. There was adab, akhlaq. I, as a, young, early 20s, could drive off in my car with another, girlfriend, and we would drive off into the middle of Sindh, never thinking that, there's going to be any danger, any harassment, any problems. Or we went off to Sath as a group of young, college students and so on. It was such a wonderful adab and akhlaqi environment. So when I, pondered on this, yes, surely the elite women had the facilities and the opportunities, obviously, to exercise that authority. But, the important thing is that the projection of their power actually raised the status of women through society, through all the classes of society. Because remember, the standards of a society are set from the top. It can be bad, as we are also aware of, and it can be for the good.
So how did it percolate?
So, as when, say, the imperial family, the women are highly educated, very powerful, very influential, and exercising that authority, that model is then absorbed by the nobility and further down by the officials. It could be Hindu, could be Sikh, could be Jains. Now remember, the Mughals have come into a society which is the most regressive as far as women are concerned, where women, forced to do sati. So it really is an uphill battle to raise the status of women in that society. But the Mughals really, quite apart from the fact that their example was being emulated,
right,
and the officials and the imperial family and nobility were transferred to the remote corners of the empire. And these ladies were traveling to remote corners of the empire with the emperor, as I said, for travel or for wars or for pilgrimage. So quite apart from they are now, it becomes known that here is, say, Noor Jahan, she's fighting a battle. Or there is Bakhtun Nisa, she's controlling Kabul. Now imagine the impact that's having on the rest of society, for women particularly. Yeah. Okay, so that's one part of it. The second is that the Mughals actually, Walid, they patronized education. They patronized adab and akhlaq. Very interesting. Anne-Marie Chemel's, she's got these wonderful books, and in one of those, she's because she was fluent in like 16 languages of our part of the world as well. And she mentions that there was in every small town a Masnavi Khwan. Maulana Room's Masnavi, which is the guidebook of ethics, it's supposed to be the Quran in Persian. This man,
it's a source book for fiqh and for ethics and for poetics and absolutely.
The Masnavi Khwan's job was simply to sit in the middle of the town and recite the Masnavi all day long.
Yeah.
Right? So women were hearing this, children were hearing this, men were hearing this. And remember, this is an oral society. You don't need to know how to read or write. They were absorbing everything orally. And in that culture, your memories are also, people who could be Hafiz-e Qurans and could be Hafiz-e Divans of Hafiz, things like that. So this was an oral culture where memorizing was part and parcel of daily life.
May I actually just brought something to my mind. Quite often among the qualifications of the female sheikhs and Sufis is mastery over the Masnavi. So Khushal Khan Khatak's two daughters who were both inducted and were given ijaza in the Mujaddidi Silsila, one of them was particularly well known as a scholar of the Masnavi, because then it opens up so many other sciences, right? It's the entryway
so
into
important. Today, being the best known poet of the USA, he's teaching ethics to the USA, but he's not being taught in Pakistan.
So you mentioned, and you've got the Masnavi Khan, the way that this percolates. How else do you see this?
Through the now just think of the zanana itself, what we call the Mughal zanana. There was like 6,000 women in that zanana, the imperial family,
right,
the, nobility, every level of society was represented.
And constantly coming in and out where the multiple zananas would be associating with each other and sending people back and forth, right?
And so they were picking up what I call this high culture. But what I mean by high culture is adab, and the respect for knowledge and the respect for women, and it all becomes part of the high culture.
You were mentioning something about poetry recitation and earlier on today. I found that rather interesting.
This is so fascinating. There's the tazkiras. You know what the tazkiras are? The lists of poets or the lists of saints or so on and so forth. There is this tazkira of the early 18th century, talking about Delhi, but it's symbolic of the rest of Hindustan, where and a tazkira is only of the top poets, right? You don't mention somebody who's saying Jack and Jill. Okay, you're talking about high poetry, and high poetry meant that you were familiar with the tasawwuf, you were familiar with all the classics, and you were familiar with grammar.
And others were familiar with your poetry, right? Because it's transactional.
The tazkiras are about people of that intellectual level, right? And who were the people in the tazkira? A darzi, a tailor, a rafugar, an ironsmith, an elephant keeper, a lancer of boils. I don't know what that fellow did. Aapka phoda hota tha, wo
poetry to survive his occupation.
Aapka phodta tha wo. There was sweeper, and there were women who were housemaids. And the dancing girls, yes, because dancing girls in those days were supposed to be highly educated and cultured. So can you imagine? And there was noblemen, of course, but what we would today say, the lowest levels of society, those people were producing poetry of such a high caliber that they were up there in the tazkiras.
And again,
zara soche aap कि ये जो आपकी तालीम और तरबियत और अदब और अखलाक पूरी माशरे में था.
And
I mean, I think the Sufis were also responsible for this.
The Khanaqah is a big part of this story, right? Because the Khanaqah becomes an entirely democratizing space. So the way the Khanaqahs are set up, which most people don't realize, is you've got the Haram Sarai, which is the female half of the Khanaqah. Again, we pay attention to the male portion, right? We don't realize that families are coming in as a whole, tribes are coming in as a whole, and staying there. So the Haram Sarai itself would have obviously the lead begum, right? The lead pir, the female pir, who would then be guiding other women from ulama families, but then you would have people there
guiding the imperial family.
Or guiding the imperial family like Roshanara, and then you would have people there who were beggars, you would have people there who are just there for food, you would have people who are there for, again, mental health services, and all of these people would be sharing the same space. So ultimately in the Khanaqah world, it's interesting that the education of, let's say, tafsir and mantaq and fiqh and all of these sciences is certainly a privilege, right? So the women from ulama families would most certainly have access, and the nobility who will then be using it, and then of course the higher spiritual sciences, the subtle centers. I would like to
say that, you see, in the imperial family, there was that, it's not like we are now English medium, Urdu medium, and English medium looking down on Urdu medium.
Yeah.
The imperial family spoke the same languages.
Right.
They were all multilingual, right? So the lower classes, what you could, I don't like calling it lower classes, but the economically lower classes, were in communication with the imperial family. These divisions which were brought in, the class, the language divisions which colonialism brought in, cut the society up. Here you may say, yes, these were imperial ladies, but these imperial ladies were in communication with, and speaking the same languages, having the same culture. Sorry, the gentleman.
Yes.
Right. No, they weren't actually. 19th century women in England were completely marginalized, and that's what we inherited.
So my question is that what actually happened? How come that 300, 400 years back, the Muslim women were so liberated and were given such importance, and that now in the 21st century, we are taunted by the world as an area or as a religion where women are supposed to be the most depressed. So what has transpired and what has happened?
Do you mind if I
start
with this? Okay, so this is an interesting anecdote that partially answers your question, but from the scholastic sphere. So the great Richard Burton, who translated 1001 Nights, and we love to read about him, he was traveling through Sindh in the mid-19th century, and he was told of a female sheikh from the same Mujaddidi silsila as Bibi Sahiba, who apparently had scores and scores of male and female followers. And what he writes in his book is that this woman must have been sexually promiscuous. This is the only way that he could actually make sense of women in authority, especially in traditional settings. And this is part and parcel of the Victorian view, which actually all of us to some degree end up inheriting, right, through the education system that we go through. So part of the answer, and I will obviously leave it to you for a more comprehensive answer, is that as we enter colonial modernity, we have a world, at least, and I'm talking about the spiritual leadership side of this, where anything beyond the physical, anything that does not contribute towards the world capitalist economy is deemed useless. In other words, tasawwuf is thrown out, the madrasas are treated like whatever.
And the Sufis are called the mad mullahs.
The Sufis are called the mad mullahs, right?
Because they were the ones opposing colonialism.
Exactly. Now, as much as the men suffered by having the waqfs removed, the financial basis of this world removed, and being again reduced to mad mullahs, actually women suffered a lot more because they became the Salem witches. And now even amongst the English-speaking class in Pakistan, when you think of a female Sufi master, you think Pirni, right? Jadoo. So this has been pre-programmed. Now I will challenge all of you, because I know this is 100% true. Think back to your own familial past, 2 generations ago, 3 generations ago, and there will be a woman, a holy woman who people went to.
And there will be your grandfathers will have been part of a Sufi silsila. And or at least influences, sohbat to wo lete the Sufiyon ki. है ना? So that was the basis of that ethics. But आप उनकी ये जैसे हमें जो हमारे साथ जो एक बड़ी जुर्म किया गया है ना कि अच्छा जब ये आए 16th century में तो कोई भी नहीं था क्योंकि वो लूटने आए in the 17th century and you had the Rose and the Berniers and the Manukis and these half-wit Europeans who, when they heard stories that, oh my God, these powerful women, they couldn't digest it. They couldn't, analyze it in their heads. And all they were capable of is कि जी बाजार में क्या गप हो रही है, उसको भी उसके ऊपर भी 4 चांद लगा के, and all the stories that those so-called
Anarkali, Noorjahan dancing,
को पैदा कर दिया एक जगह कि नूरजहां नाचती थी तो अरे खुदा के बंदे, and all they talk about is oh they were sexually terrible and they were drunken women and रोशन आरा को कि जी औरंगजेब इतना नाराज हुआ उसने उसको जहर दे दिया because she was so fast. ये तो ये ऐसे
and by the way, I may add that the letters written to Roshanara by her Sufi sheikh are so sophisticated it would require a PhD in philosophy to actually navigate those letters. It gives you a sense of the degree of in fact, sophistication that we're talking about.
Right. So you see those, and so you have those travel accounts. ठीक है ना? अच्छा उसमें एक मसला हुआ था मुगल उसमें ज़माने में कि while in all the official histories you will have the births, deaths, marriages, and there'll be always wonderful, references to the ladies, but जब अकबर ने ज़नाने को ज़रा अलहदा करना पड़ा उसको, तो उसमें then the daily lives जैसे गुलबदन हुमायूं नामा में लिखती, इतने मज़े मज़े की चुटकुलियाँ बयान करती हैं वो, उस तो आपको समझ में आ जाता है कि ये ख़वातीन की ज़िंदगी कैसी थी. तो इनके उसके बाद इनकी तारीख़ जो बादशाहों के लिए लिखी जाती थी या वो खुद लिखते थे, तो वो इसमें इतना ज़्यादा जिक्र नहीं करते थे. So you have to actually dig deep to pick it up, and you pick up this woman's history through paintings and through other little bits and pieces that you can find.
Hi, hello. I have a question.
5 minutes, okay.
I'm here.
So the tragedy, the crime, and
सवाल कोई और पूछ रहा है.
Oh, sorry. नहीं, तो इनका जवाब नहीं पूरा हुआ. Sorry, I'll try to make it as.
मेरे ख्याल में काफी हो चुका है.
इतना लंबा जवाब हो गया. तो एक तो ये इन कमबख्तों की ये जो ट्रैवलर्स टेल्स इन्होंने हमें हमारे ऊपर सौंपी, उसके बाद जब पूरा पक्का कलोनियलिज्म 1857 के बाद, तो फिर तो उन्होंने सिर्फ जो उनका भाई एक तरह से कहना चाहिए that was their way of saying कि हम बड़ा बेहतरी कर रहे हैं बर्रे सगीर के लिए कि इनकी औरतों का तो इतना बुरा हाल है, तो हम बचाने आए हैं. गो के वो विक्टोरियन औरतें तो हम.
We've heard this again a few times, by the way.
Yeah.
The saving of the women from themselves in the Muslim world.
This is happening everywhere, even in बेचारे अफगानों के साथ और कहाँ हर जगह. We're saving the women. Okay, great. So this was a story which was concocted. It was put in the textbooks. The Mughal men themselves were turned into caricatures, degenerates. The women were turned into degenerate women. The Sufis became mad mullahs. And till today, I'm sorry to say, it's disgraceful that a slightly similar version is taught to our children today. कि अभी मैं देख रही थी OUP की 7th grade की किताब, उसमें क्या जी वो तो अनारकली, अरे अनारकली कहाँ से आ गई, एक फिगमेंट ऑफ द इमेजिनेशन किसी की उधर की. जी अकबर ने क्या किया, अकबर ने उन्होंने अपने जो दूध शरीक भाई था उसको फेंक दिया. ये अकबर हु इज द कंसिडर्ड वन ऑफ द 4 greatest rulers the world has ever seen, ये सिर्फ आप उसके बारे में कह सकते. तो we have, why are we persisting? Because the Mughals had a
Can we get the
vision.
next question as well?
What's the next question?
Yes. Hi.
Don't get me started on how I get angry with the portrayal of the Mughals today.
जी,
Hi. Yes, I have a question. I am here, if you can see.
Where are you?
Yes, I am here.
Acha.
So I'm a scholar of international relations, and in our education, there is a feminist perspective of international relations. The pressing question there is that where are the women? So definitely after attending this session, I realized that this question wasn't valid in the Mughal Empire.
I'm so happy.
Yes. So I must inquire, why are these women, these amazing women, are absent from our history books from 10th class to even if you're doing O levels or A levels, they are absent. Why are we studying?
Why are the Mughals absent from your studies? Because the Mughals believed in justice and welfare of the poor, and we are ruled by colonials, and we don't, and our ulama, supposedly ulama, don't want to go adab and akhlaq. They want empty rituals. So it's very convenient to keep the Mughals out.
May I address the women question?
Yes, why are we studying Muhammad bin Qasim? Why not Zebun Nisa or any Begum?
Please,
Pasha?
it's your generation who
Or-
has to protest.
Or the women who are active in Muhammad bin Qasim's time, right? This is, okay, so this is it's a multifaceted, I'll try to keep this brief. Right.
Don't
It's
do that.
it's multifaceted. So on one hand, we can blame colonialism and say they rewrote our history. Anything positive was relegated to the dustbin, right? ठीक है, that in its place. The second part is actually us. And I'm talking about not us as in the mullahs and the this and the that and the leaders. There are hints in the literature everywhere regarding women, and we're just not paying attention.
And we still...
So, may I please, Mehrbani, thank you.
I can't.
Okay, please, all right. You're putting me in a very awkward position where talking about women and I'm trying to
Shut my mother.
gain my male voice in this space in front of my mother. There goes my career. Not to mention the internal family dynamics. तो जी आपकी इजाज़त से. Okay, so the indications are everywhere, and we're not looking there. And I'm going to give you an example. There is a sort of leading tech entrepreneur who's sitting in front of me, who's a good friend of mine, and she and I and a group of people were in Balochistan in a shrine many, many kilometers off the main road, and a Sufi sheikh had mentioned to us that that particular kingdom was ruled in the early 18th century by a queen who was the greatest queen of the age and is remembered till today. I found her tomb, right? So the whisper is there. We need to follow the whispers. We need to pay attention. Again, the governor of Lahore for a couple of years when Bibi Sahiba was young was a woman. How many people here know this? In the Durrani Empire, she was very close to Ahmad Shah Durrani. In fact, a very good friend of Ahmad Shah Durrani's, is praised in the chronicles as this incredible, and very sort of forceful woman. And she also belongs to the same, in fact, Naqshbandi Mujaddidi lineage in terms of her family. She was governing this city. How many people know this? 1750s. Murad Begum, right? I'm sorry, as I'm saying this, the whisper came in that I don't remember her name actually. She's Murad Begum, I think. I think it's Murad Begum. Well, there you have it. The person talking doesn't remember her name. So the whispers are everywhere and we have to follow them. So part of the problem is definitely ours. And then the third side of it is that it is a society of parda, right, in the physical space. And what's rather interesting is that parda in the physical space ends up actually translating into the biographical space. So while no biographical writer in the past will ever deny, for example, female sainthood, they would never do that. But what they will do is they're going to gloss over things. So it's very common to find that such and such person was a great saint, did wonderful things, thousands of people following her, but in the interest of time, let's move on to the next topic.
This, by the way, is another point one should realize. There was segregation. It wasn't that it was not segregated. But it's amazing that now, today, we think it's amazing, but there it was, at that time, it was perfectly natural, including the Mughal Zanana and including the Haram Sarai on this side, that they were not roaming the streets, but within this, all this power and authority was being exercised very, casually, very normally. That's something which we tend to forget. And that's probably what made these European guys...
In many ways, the spiritual traditions are stronger than Pakistan. Yeah. Because British India, which Pakistan came under, ended up actually suffering under the sort of the politics of religion, the Barelvi Jamaat, Deobandi Jamaat, and so on and so forth. And that same thing didn't quite tamper with the traditional establishment within Afghanistan. I'll just give you the granddaughter of Sibghatullah Mujaddidi, who's actually descended from Bibi Sahiba's sheikh, and was briefly the president of Afghanistan, just reached out to me, put me in touch with her father, who's the son of Sibghatullah, who immediately sent me a picture of him at Bibi Sahiba's shrine. Right. So the Sufi traditions are very strong. They're embedded within the culture. Even those who appear to the outside as heavily conservative will most often have some affiliation with a silsila. And keep in mind, Bibi Sahiba's silsila this is the Hazrat of Shur Bazar are the most influential Sufi network in Afghanistan's last 250 years. They fought the First and Second Anglo-Afghan War and the anti-Soviet jihad. Even now, Pir Bara, one of the most sort of largest religious networks in Afghanistan going into Pakistan today, they stem directly from Bibi Sahiba's lineage, and he himself in the late 20th, early 21st century, in fact, wrote a 20-page treatise arguing that women can be Sufi sheikhs when someone actually challenged that. In fact, it was 3 women from Lahore who were his khalifas who wrote to him saying some people are arguing that women can't be religious leaders, and then he offered a rebuttal. And within the rebuttal were actually 4 pages of Bibi Sahiba, the elder's history. So amongst the traditionalist networks, the memories are still very much alive.
And you know, the mere fact that as early as 1965, Pakistan elected Fatma Jinnah as president of the country, these are all still the reflections of the status that women had acquired. And at that time, there was nobody in Europe or anywhere else that had been elected president or a prime minister. And we were ready to do that. I mean, of course, the election was nullified by Ayub. But the fact that we could and we did elect her is a reflection of the status that women had achieved despite all that.
We're being told the time is
90
Right.
years. Okay.
Well, I just wanted to confirm it because my visits to Afghanistan were limited to some areas. There was always some problem with UN. They had restricted, the travel and all that. But there is a special feel, and also to Umarkot, which was mentioned, and the desert. There's very
something.
different. It's very special.
There's something. Yeah.
So thank you for that.
बाद में पूछती हूँ।
Thank you.